Well, up next is my good friend, the congressman from primarily in Polk County, but portions of Hillsborough as well. I'm talking about Ross Spano, and Ross has been serving us in the 15th Congressional District. He's the former local small business owner that went to Congress, and he's the only Florida congressman serving on the House Civil Business Committee. And he also serves on the House Transportation and Infrastructure Committee. And there's a couple bills that we had some action on this week. Hey, that's news in itself, that there's something happening in Washington that isn't something controversial with the Democrats. Ross Spano, good to have you with us this afternoon.
Hey, Bill, so good to be with you, especially under the circumstances, to have some good news to report in the midst of what is, for the most part, a broken city up here. So, yeah, I'm excited. As you said, owned a small business for over a decade, and one of the reasons I actually wanted to come went to the state capitol in Florida and wanted to come to Congress just to help them support small business. So to actually have a chance to get some things done this week has been exciting. We had two pieces. The first one passed off of the House floor, H.R. 6133. It's called the Step Improvement Act, and it basically aims to increase the number of American small businesses that export and raise the value of existing small business exporters. So it increases demand and also creates jobs. It's you and I both, I'm sure, agree it's critical to provide that assistance to American small businesses looking to export and expand their operations, certainly right now as we're trying to come out of the coronavirus. And then the second piece of legislation was H.R. 7903. That passed out of the Small Business Committee today unanimously. And essentially what that bill does is provides some government-backed loans to small businesses really nationwide, particularly some small businesses that are underserved, like our veteran-owned businesses. This is going to help some small businesses grow and allow them to access some low-cost capital. So those are two exciting things. We did have one amendment to that bill, which was good, especially in light of what's going on in North Florida with the storm. Highlighted the need for this. It also concludes within that program businesses who have been damaged where there's been a designated disaster area, for instance, after a hurricane. So businesses in areas that are trying to recover after a large storm will also be able to access these government-backed loans. So those are a couple things we've been doing, and hopefully a little bit of positive news is always good coming out of Washington, especially this last year or so.
Well, I want to focus in on these two bills because both of these are your bills, and that's very important.
Yeah.
435 members of Congress, and for today's purposes, I'm not going to mention any names, but we have people here in Central Florida who've been into Congress, and maybe if they passed one bill or introduced a bill, that's about all we know of. Tell us, before you went to Congress and now that you have been in the system, how difficult is it for you to be a relatively new congressperson, to have your ideas that you were excited about bringing to the chamber there in the House? Tell us the real deal. How difficult is it to play the game to get your bills up in committee?
Well, it's really, really difficult, given the partisan nature of the atmosphere here, especially where you're in a swing district like the one I represent, and you're in the minority party. It makes it challenging because the majority party doesn't really want to give you a quote-unquote win necessarily. So it's very challenging, very, very difficult. I will say that in the small business kind of space, it's a little bit more bipartisan than a lot of the other areas, which are very partisan. So more bipartisan legislation comes out of that small business committee. So one of the reasons why I actually, other than the fact that I was a former small business owner, one of the reasons I wanted to be on small business is because I knew there was some legislation that was going to come out. But it's certainly much more difficult to pass legislation, at the federal level than it was in Tallahassee. I can remember my first year in the Florida House of Representatives back in 2013. I had 9 pieces of legislation that passed out, numerous human trafficking bills that were much needed. So not the case up here in Washington, unfortunately. It's bitterly partisan, and many times good pieces of legislation fall by the wayside because of the partisan nature of this city, which is very unfortunate because the American people send us up here to fix problems, and unfortunately that doesn't happen in most cases.
Mm. And, one of our mutual friends, dear friend, former Speaker of the House, member of Congress, that's Dan Webster. And I always remember when Dan became Speaker of the House because, look, the way politics is usually played, if your party didn't gain a majority in the chamber that you got elected to, Well, history tells us that you get on the back rows, you don't get a whole lot of time, and nothing of your bills even get the time of day. And I just want to say that there, like yourself, there's a few statesmen because Dan Webster changed all of the rules in the House, and he wanted everybody who got elected to at least have an opportunity to showcase at least one of the bills that their local constituents knew back home.
Yeah.
And but I got to tell you, Congressman, with the bipartisanship that we see today and the most ridiculous inability of one of the parties to renounce violence, to renounce anarchy, boy, you wonder, how long can this system last without it just absolutely tearing apart?
Well, you have to ask that question. A lot of Americans, I think, are asking that, and we certainly need a lot of prayer, Bill. I know your listeners would agree with that, so we need to be in fervent prayer for, people who will come to positions of government and really earnestly seek the Lord and also solve problems. It is what it is, as they say. Our nation right now is bitterly divided from Main Street to here in Washington. So we need a lot of prayer. I think God is really the only one ultimately that's going to help us solve the problems that we have right now. And in large part, I think we're having these problems because we've turned our back on the Lord over several decades. And so we're reaping what we've sown, which is unfortunate, but God can still do miracles. And if we'll humble ourselves and seek the Lord and turn from our wicked ways, and He'll hear from heaven and answer our prayers and heal our land. That's my prayer.
Amen. Well, you're hearing from Florida's 15th Congressional District Representative, Republican Ross Spano, a good friend, spending some time this afternoon talking about two pieces of legislation, not one but two, that he personally sponsored that has had movement on Monday and today, and that is extraordinary. And as the Congressman said, a little bit of good news in the times that we are in. Now, I want to shift focus here. My audience knows over the last week or so, I have been categorically denouncing Netflix, huge entertainment platform in America. They brought a French film to the American screens. They got an 11-year-old girl who's actually an 11-year-old girl who is, as far as I'm concerned, it is nothing but child pornography. It is child smut. And I think that they have violated the law. And I know that some of the senators have taken notice, as well as you have taken notice there in the House. I'm talking about this movie called Cuties. And, Congressman, as far as I'm concerned, I believe that if somebody made a film like that here around Lakeland or Tampa, Sarasota, Bradenton, I think the authorities might be looking into it for illegal child pornography. What say you?
Yeah. No, I couldn't agree with you more. It's disgusting. It definitely deserves the notice of the American people of good conscience, certainly Christians across the country. So actually in the coming days, myself and a number of other members of Congress, we're going to be sending a letter to the Attorney General Barr, to look into Netflix's distribution of this movie. It is clearly sexual in nature. I think it clearly depicts child pornography. The definition of child pornography under 18 U.S.C. Section 2256 is any visual depiction of sexually explicit conduct involving a minor. That conduct doesn't need to specifically depict sexual activity. I think clearly Cuties, the movie, it meets that United States legal definition for child pornography. There was, you mentioned it, but it contains a scene of an 11-year-old girl, dressed in a tank top, an undergarment splashed with water, and she begins twerking. I mean, and numerous other equally kind of distressing depictions of minors, including nudity. And someone actually said recently that what the Avengers movies are to comic book geeks, Cuties is to pedophiles. Let me say that one more time. Someone said what the Avengers movies are to comic book geeks, Cuties is to pedophiles. And I've really strongly opposed human trafficking, particularly child human trafficking. And so we know that pornography, particularly child pornography, feeds human trafficking. And so we've got to draw a line in the sand. If anybody out there has a subscription to Netflix, and I'm sure you've said it to them, your listeners, but I'll encourage you ought to cancel that today. You ought to pick up the phone call right after this interview, after the program, and cancel your Netflix. That's the least that we can do as Christians. We should not be supporting an organization that distributes that smut.
Yeah, I want to tell you, one of the former colleagues there in the House, Gabby Giffords, and we all remember her story, I think she characterized it yesterday as sort of a feeding trough for pedophiles. And I just shudder to think, sanctioned by Netflix, and the fact that Netflix has no sensitivity whatsoever. But again, I reiterate, I mean, that's a huge entertainment platform that has, believe me, a lot of allies in Hollywood. And there's a lot of stories of child exploitation that happens, whether it's in the theater, in the movie business, or in so many areas that these entertainment venues operate in. And I tell you what, if the veil ever got pulled back on some of these horrendous activities that have been taking place, it would make that island down in the Caribbean where all of our VIPs went to party, it would look like a Girl Scout outing.
You're right. And we know, Bill, that Hollywood, can crack the door open and begin to normalize some of these behaviors that we would never imagine becoming normalized. But this is the way it starts. This is the way it begins. And so it is. I think it's deeply distressing to me and to the vast majority of Americans that you have a mainstream media company that is promoting essentially the sexualization of children. We got to take a stand against it.
Well, I'll tell you what, to do that, you really ought to consider canceling that subscription to Netflix and, take an inventory. What are you watching at night? The average cable service, you have hundreds of channels. But have you ever sat down in your chair and said to yourself, there's nothing on tonight. There's nothing to watch. And when you look at all of the garbage that's there, and I guess now the average bill is about $200 for cable, why don't you give yourself a raise? Who knows? Might be able to take a road trip in 2 or 3 months. But anyway, we're out of time. My good friend, the Congressman, Ross Spano, 15th Congressional District, wonderful job he's been doing, and the proof's in the pudding, telling us about 2 very important small business bills today. We appreciate you so much, and I know you're busy there in D.C., but thanks for spending a few moments with us.
Hey, my privilege, Bill. Good to be with you and good to be with your listeners. God bless.
Take care, my friend.